Greetings and welcome to an extra special sequel episode of Genre Grinder with extra special returning guest, Bill. And then, Bill, last time you were on, I asked you how to pronounce your last name and you told me, and then I pronounced it wrong immediately right off the bat.
It is Ackerman.
It's Ackerman, not Ackerman. Ackerman.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, geez, hard name. Obviously a very hard name to pronounce there.
Well, you could have said Ackerman. I mean,
Ackerman.
Too.
Anyway, thank you for taking time to return to us, Bill.
Sure.
And can you just remind listeners who you are, what you're about, and what kind of we can talk about what we did last time before we get started?
Yeah. I host supporting characters on the Now Playing Network, although it's been on hiatus this year. I also do hosting for Directors Club sometimes, and I also contribute occasional supplements to home video releases. I think this year I was on the Texas Chain Saw Massacre from Second Sight, doing commentary with Amanda Reyes. She and I just did Fatal Games for Vinegar Syndrome. I'm on the Radiance Messiah of Evil, doing the booklet essay, a couple of other things. But maybe that, if anyone knows who I am, that might be some of the stuff I've done that they might know.
Yeah, I got the Radiance one. I wrote a review of that disc, and fortunately, the non-limited edition kept your writing in the little booklet.
Yes, I was really happily surprised because I just assumed that the version that sold out like before the thing even came out was going to be the way you could read it, because that's usually how it works. But
yeah.
But
so this is a sequel to what I ended up calling the alternative American horror of the 1970s. That was sort of like the best way I could encompass this. This isn't really a genre grinder episode in terms of this as being a specific genre, but this being a sort of portrait of time of what horror was like in the 70s. But we're not going to talk about, all the really big name, like no Halloween, no Texas Chainsaw Massacre, none of the big stuff. This is like the stuff that snuck in and has become more popular now that home video companies are looking for, boutique labels are looking for stuff to release and stuff to make new cult films out of. And I think that the Stephen Thrower book, Nightmare USA, had a big hand in the appeal of these kinds of movies.
Yeah. I mean, thought of these kind of films as kind of being kind of more dreamy and idiosyncratic than a lot of the kind of bigger genre titles of the 70s. I think last time you and I spoke about these films, we talked about Dream No Evil, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, Images, Premonition, Season of the Witch, Messiah of Evil, Lamora, Death Dream, Dark August, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, and Keep My Grave Open. So if people have a sense of what connects those films in terms of like a certain kind of tone, maybe that's kind of maybe the loosest kind of framework we could throw around the next 11 we're talking about today. Although, like you said, there isn't really a set genre, and there's quite a lot that would differentiate, say, Death Game from Pigs or Ganja Hess.
Right. And another rule we kind of made up was no big name directors, but then we broke it by having a George Romero movie on the last one.
Yeah.
But I think we decided that was like Romero at his least well known in that period between his Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, and Jack's Wife, aka Season of the Witch, is like borderline horror, borderline kind of an art drama. And some of the films we're talking about today are in that same kind of on the edge of the genre kind of feeling.
Right.
I mean, you could argue that some of them aren't horror movies in the way that we think of like Halloween or, Hills Have Eyes or something like that. I mean, these are sometimes a little bit more like character study films that have like that kind of morbid horror element.
Yeah, they're like existential horror, esoteric horror. Yeah. A lot of them are dramas, though. And that's something that I'm thinking I'm going to bring up pretty quickly here. But before we get into, I just also wanted to say before we get started that both times we've done this, there's been several films I hadn't seen before. And in large part because they always start so slowly, I think, oh, this is a drag. This is going to be the one that I don't like. But then there's always this turning point where I realize I'm fully invested in enjoying myself. And there's this very specific wavelength that I can't really describe. I'm going to struggle to describe all throughout this podcast. And so I'm not going to have the vocabulary to say what I mean sometimes. And so hopefully Bill is able to figure out what I'm trying to say. But just as a sort of going into this, if people do plan on watching these films, kind of keep that in mind, that almost all of them are going to move at a slow pace at first, and they're not going to feel like what you're usually thinking of as horror movies, and that
Yeah,
they might not work for you, but if they do, it might take a minute.
I feel like I assume that they're either good Sunday afternoon watches or
Hmm.
3 in the morning kind of feeling crazed from insomnia kind of viewing.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I ended up doing. This was I watching these as we're preparing for the holidays, basically. And so I was squeezing them in between. There's always a lot of review copies come around the holidays, and squeezing them in between that and a vacation down to see my relatives. And it was kind of, yeah, they work really well for that kind of thing.
Well, since you mentioned Stephen Thrower, when I interviewed him for Nightmare USA for the Supporting Characters podcast, he told me that he got the idea, I guess, for writing that book when he was really sick, I think with like a stomach bug or something, but he was on the couch and just watching a lot of these movies and like in a kind of a weird kind of state. And like, I think he felt like these films had almost kind of like a druggy kind of feeling, like they were
Hmm.
very kind of unusual kind of sensation and in terms of the plotting and the strange kind of rhythm of them. And I think that's something that I think applies to most of these as far as like I hate to use words like trippy, but they're,
Yeah.
but they have kind of like a weird kind of dreamy pacing to them that, yeah, it might be a little slow if you're looking for something that's kind of like an adrenaline rush kind of film. They're all kind of slow burns, I think.
Yeah, they're kind of like I've never taken hallucinogens, but I've had high fevers
Yeah.
where you're just it's not like you're flat out hallucinating, but you're just like something is not right.
Yeah, yeah, I think like feverish
Mhm.
yeah, like melodrama's gone wrong. I mean, I was thinking
Yeah.
about what connects these films, and
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to say the titles all at the beginning or not, but I was thinking about how they almost all involve a threatening situation that ensues when an outsider enters a home, whether invited or uninvited. And sometimes the threat is entering the house, sometimes the threat is already within the house. There's a family trauma component to a lot of them.
Hmm.
So it's, a lot of melodramas, a lot of them feel like they could be made for the stage. I think one originates from a play and one was adapted into a stage play.
Yeah.
A few of these have been remade into Hollywood films, but for the most part, I think these are all films that kind of slipped under the radar at the time that they came out to varying degrees. I don't think any, and almost all of them have had multiple titles.
Yes, and they get re-released over and over, and quite a few of them are from filmmakers that made maybe no other movies or just a couple other movies.
Yeah, and no one else made a second horror movie. I think the
Yeah.
only exception is John Grismer, who wrote one of them. He made two films as a director afterwards, but
Mhm.
yeah, all of the directors are not people that made a second horror film.
Well, let's get into it. I'm going to go as usual. I'm going to go in a chronological order here. I'm going to start with Death by Invitation from 1971, and this is directed by Ken Friedman. This is one I hadn't seen before. And I thought I had based on the title, but I think what you're talking about with titles, I had the wrong title down there. And it's kind of crazy because they're starting off the bat with the one movie I hadn't seen that I think blew me away the most, and I liked the most, and I thought about the most, but also one that just perfectly fits all the stuff that we talked about in both of these podcasts, essentially.
Yeah, that makes me so happy because I this was one where I wasn't sure, what you would make of it. I mean, I think I saw it. It was on the first Vinegar Syndrome release I ever got. It was on a double
Mm,
feature with Savage Water, which went out of print almost immediately because of a rights issue with Savage Water. But I think I saw it just kind of on a whim because it was the double feature with the slasher movie that I bought, and then
mm,
I was just blown away by it. Also, I think it was just. Yeah, it's the earliest film that we're talking about. It was filmed in I think mid-May of 1971 as The Witch Story, and I guess it reminded me of George Romero's films in some way.
yes.
Maybe a little bit of Jack's wife, but also a little bit of Martin too. Has a great central performance by Shelby Leverington, and I think that she's maybe the secret weapon of the film because she's so good in it that I think she lends kind of a real weight to what could be kind of a campy film if not cast with the right lead performance.
Yeah, I mean, she has to like basically look into the camera and just give a long monologue at one point, and it might be the best scene in the whole movie.
Yeah.
I'm gonna quickly say I'm gonna base every synopsis I read here. I'm just using the letterbox synopsis, so really quick.
Mhm.
Um, a young woman who learns that one of her ancestors has been burned at the stake as a witch decides to exact revenge on the descendants of the people who had killed her. And what that doesn't really describe is that they don't say it explicitly, but it kind of feels like she doesn't just learn it, like she's told it in like her dreams, like her DNA tells her. She's basically witnessing. The movie begins with this relative being killed, and it's a really, a lot of the movie's really like slow and still, but this beginning is really it reminded me of those really early Brian De Palma movies where it's just like him and his art school friends, and he's just like cramming the camera in with what's basically performance art. It reminded me of that, but then mixed with this really stagey way that like the makeup, a lot of the people just have grease paint and no other stuff. They're dressed kind of like pilgrims, but they just have white faces, and
Yeah.
it's sort of eerie, but then it has this sort of like cheap B movie aesthetic to it, and I just love the sort of juxtaposition of like this is sort of art house but also sort of junky in a good way.
What's funny, we're talking about 11 films today, and I couldn't help noticing that we have 5 East Coast, 5 West Coast, and then 1 in the middle that feels like a complete outlier.
Mm,
And, this is an East Coast one. This is Staten Island, and I feel like it's Andy Milligan country. So I
mm.
wonder, I mean, in some ways, it could be like a less hyper, less insane kind of, cousin to the Andy Milligan films from this period.
An Andy
Uh,
Milligan movie made by somebody who doesn't like, isn't a total, doesn't hate humanity.
yes. Yeah, Andy Milligan movie made by someone that's gonna work in Hollywood with, Jonathan Kaplan a couple of years later.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was thinking about, like, how this is also like a horror in suburbia kind of film that kind of predates things like Last House on the Left and Death Dream and other things that come later. I mean, I don't know how common those kind of, horror stories in that kind of contemporary '70s settings really were. This is at the beginning of the decade, but I don't think that was something you saw a lot. I think that was still,
No.
a genre that you'd find either in the, Gothic castle kind of settings or in cities or countryside. But this is small town USA. Yeah, no, I think I just thought it was interesting because it's also kind of tying in that kind of like equating the hippie counterculture with the occult in a way that I thought was not something I think had really been done a whole lot at that point.
So this one has a way of connecting the what, quote unquote feminist horror that we talked about a lot with Let's Scare Jessica to Death, where it's, images and Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I guess goes back to Repulsion, where a woman is sort of neurotic woman horror is what I was calling it when I was writing things down. But it takes that sort of thing where there's this outsider woman in a weird situation, but it instead of being the neurotic victim, she is the aggressor, and so that sort of turns into almost like a really weird version of a home invasion story, because she just sort of enters in these people's lives and slowly murders them.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like was it like Teorema, the Pasolini, like any of those kind of films where like a stranger's invited into the home and kind of breaks the family unit apart.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess since you mentioned Jessica, it's kind of like the Mary Claire Costello character from Let's Get Jessica to Death, who's the
right.
hippie woman invited in.
That's the
Um,
exact note I have here, is that this is like if you retold Let's Scare Jessica to Death from the point of view of the vampire, the supposed vampire.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and I think, yeah, I mean, it has some fun kills and some really quirky comedy to it too, as far as
Hmm.
like the satire of the workplace and
The workplace part, it has shades of The Graduate, and there's like a scene that I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a direct reference to The Graduate, where the father-in-law is telling his, well, no, he's not a, I don't think they're married yet. He was his would-be son-in-law, but he's talking about real estate instead of plastics.
yeah, yeah, no, he's almost kind of like he's almost on the verge of being a broad caricature compared to her performance, as far as like being
Right.
just kind of like the blowhard, kind of bigoted father, um, that he stands in for the witch hunter of old. I mean,
Yeah.
the judgment, and that's such an interesting kind of take because I mean, this is coming after Witchfinder General and things that kind of Mark of the Devil, but it's kind of transposing it to like almost kind of a suburban satire.
Yeah, I suppose I hadn't thought about that. This is only what, 2 or 3 years after Witchfinder General, uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that would have been, yeah, pretty recent.
like a year after Blood on Satan's Claw. I think that had come. I think that was a 19.
1970, yep.
Yeah, so I didn't even think about those. So this is like an American approach to that very UK, that like the new wave of UK horror. This is like a reaction to that almost. I don't know if it was on purpose, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I don't think Ken Friedman does a whole lot of press about this one.
right.
Even the interview, even the few interviews I have found on him, I mean, because he went into really kind of better known as a screenwriter. He did White Line Fever. He did for Walter Hill. He did Johnny Handsome. He made a film that I've always wanted to see that I never have, called Made in the USA, that I only heard about because Sonic Youth did the music in the 80s.
Hmm.
So he went on to like a proper career, but he did not return to horror. And this one, I don't think really saw much of a release. It was distributed alongside Carnival of Blood and The Curse of the Headless Horseman through Paragon Films.
Uh-huh.
So like that really rough early 70s kind of horror, not rough like explicit, but like low budget, kind of slow paced, not a lot of fan bases for those films now, I don't think. Like I think that
Yeah.
they're kind of a little bit sleepy, but this one I think has also got the slow pace, but I think has like real powerful scenes. I think this
Yeah.
is like a real sleeper that I think got kind of sandwiched alongside some kind of more forgettable films.
Well, and I think it does an interesting thing with the whole feminist horror thing where the feminist allegory part, or not even allegory, but the feminist character is not a victim, as I said, and the fact that she's still sort of the protagonist of the story, even though she's killing people. That there are very few parts where, I mean, I guess we don't hate the family, but there are very few parts where we are meant to root against her. Is the way I felt watching it.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, when she kills certain characters that are more innocent, so I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I'm sure some audiences read her as like pure evil, but I agree with you that I kind of root for her also.
Well, and this is a question I had for you. There's the movie The Love Witch. I've never seen it, but
Hmm.
based on the trailers for Love Witch, it felt like a little like, I know that was a response to, I believe, Jess Franco kind of movies, kind of homaged of those. But if with did you ever see that? Did that have anything in common with this, or am I
A
wrong?
little bit, yeah. No, it probably has more in common with it than Jess Franco movies. And
Okay, I was
Annabelle is
told it.
yeah, Annabelle's a little cagey on influences because she always, says that it's referencing things that people never mention in the reviews, like soap operas, but
Oh yeah.
melodramas. But she, yeah, it is similar. I mean, I guess the pushiness of the, like, there's a man that is engaged to the daughter of the head of the household, and he's, whether he's smitten by witchcraft or just an asshole, like he's immediately kind of
Yeah.
drawn to her in a way that's like a little bit too aggressive. And I think
Hmm.
the film isn't trying to completely shut that down. I mean, it is a little kind of it's a little bit unclear if it's got some reactionary kind of values mixed in with its kind of feminism. So I mean, I think it kind of plays it both ways in a way that's a little bit schizophrenic if I read it that way, but I don't mind that because I think that it
I have a note here saying that was the one sequence that her being essentially sexually assaulted,
yeah.
um, was the one sequence that I felt like it didn't work for me because I had image of what this movie was trying to say, and I don't necessarily think that was Friedman trying to be subversive. I
No, 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 I don't either. I think that and I don't know if that was a cop to the you know, to the to presumed male audience that that they were still going to get like a case where kind of old-fashioned machismo is not totally discounted,
But then they kind of try to have it both ways because then he kills the patriarch, and so there's like an implication that she seduced him into doing her dirty work, but
Right.
it
Yeah.
doesn't quite. Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of these movies will have something about them that sort of doesn't work in modern eyes, and to
Yeah.
some people it'll be, oh, that special effect wasn't convincing, but to people like you and me, I think it's that, well, that idea isn't convincing when you do this instead. But
Yeah.
speaking of violence, though, there is, and for a movie that's not really much of a horror movie, there is a beheading scene that is genuinely chilling, and a pretty good beheading prop. Like, I didn't it's shot in a way where you don't know what you're looking at first until the head moves in a way that's wrong.
Yeah, I think, and I feel like the death that immediately follows that though could be the one that is closest to like Kathy's curse level camp,
Hmm.
as far
Yeah,
as,
that's
and I don't
yeah.
want to spoil any plot points if people haven't
Yeah,
seen it. But
I mean, a couple of these movies I'm being willing to spoil on, but I think this one is this. There's a couple on here that I think I really want people to see. So yeah, I think we shouldn't spoil too much.
yeah,
But yeah, there is one like scene that actually got to me, and I really don't watch horror movies to be frightened anymore these days. So I was impressed by that.
yeah. Oh no, I'm so glad that you like this one because I think that this one has kind of flown under the radar, even with the Vinegar Syndrome release. I feel like I never hear people talk about it, and it was just a nice surprise when I did catch it on DVD. I don't think it's had a Blu-ray release, and I don't even know that it's streaming either on Gray Market or otherwise right now.
No,
So
I had to unfortunately I had to download a copy of that Blu-ray is what I ended up finding. That was the
yeah,
best I could do. It
yeah.
wasn't on like sometimes YouTube. A couple of these are on YouTube, and I'll mention which ones when we get there. But this one was not available on YouTube.
Yeah.
The only other things I had is I spent most of the movie trying to figure out where I knew Shelby Liverington from,
Mhm.
and I was looking at her IMDb. I'm like, oh, I've just seen her on TV shows because she does like one episode of a million TV shows. But I finally figured out she's in The Long Riders, the Walter Hill movie,
Oh, okay.
and I've seen that movie a million times. But it's so funny because that's one of the Walter Hill movies that Kaplan had nothing to do with apparently. Like he did a bunch of Walter Hill movies, but not the one that she's in. I thought that was really funny. And then the other weird, like personal thing that came up is that Kaplan directed Heart Like a Wheel, which
Yeah.
was when I was growing as a Shirley Muldowney biopic. She
Mhm.
was a woman drag racer. That was one of my dad's favorite movies growing up. So I had seen it a couple times, and I actually have I used to have nightmares about the scene where she catches on fire. But it's also the basis of one of L7's best songs, and there are clips from the movie and the song. So that was really exciting to learn, and that was how I'd learned that it was Bonnie Bedelia in that movie, and I completely forgot. But yeah, so
Yeah,
uh,
no, I think when this was shooting, I think Denver John Collins, who's one of the actors in it, he's the brother of singer Judy Collins, and then Brian Hamill's also in the cast, and he's the brother of the writer Pete Hamill. So they were like promoting these kind of like celebrity sibling tie-ins in the press. It was the only way to drum up any interest, but it barely got a release that I could find. I know it premiered in St. Louis, which is where Shelby Leverington was originally from. I think she was a stage actress there before migrating to
mhm.
the cities. But I think all these films got a regional rollout of some kind or another. I mean, this is before, horror movies really opened, coast to coast anyway. But
Yeah, and
um,
I suppose the East Coast didn't have as many drive-ins. That's the way growing up in the Southwest, you always hear about the drive-ins being the
yeah,
way that people saw a lot of them. But I don't know about this one.
I don't have his name in front of me, but it was it Kit Pictures? I mean, it was it was an adult film distributor primarily.
I'm not surprised. It does have it doesn't like cross any lines, but it's pretty
Kurt Films. I'm sorry.
Kurt films.
Yeah.
It's relatively graphic in the sexual department for 1971. You know, well, actually, that's a good segue into the next movie. And if you don't have anything else to say
Oh
about
yeah, no,
this,
no, I don't.
so so the next movie is Love Me Deadly from 1972, and this is directed by Jacques Lacerte or
Yeah.
Lacerte, but I'm guessing Lacerte. And this is literally his only IMDb credit. He doesn't have any you go on IMDb and there'll be a director and you're like, oh, he only directed one movie, but he was like script consultant or key grip or something on some other movie. This is just bare bones. This is all that Jacques did.
Well, what's funny is I did some digging into Jacques Lacerte, and he's actually Jack Lacerte, a
Oh,
not
he wanted to
law
sound
teacher
fancy.
that he used to teach like he was a drama coach.
Okay.
Um, I forget which school, but he taught out west. Like he was a drama teacher, and then he
Okay.
left to concentrate on directing Love Me Deadly. And I don't know. He died in 1988. So I don't know what he did in the year. He was around for another decade after the film, but I don't know if he went back to teaching or not. But yeah, he didn't pursue a film career before or after Love Me Deadly.
That's funny. He was actually Jack. The plot for this one is a young socialite struggling to control her necrophilic urges is torn between her affections for a kind businessman and the mortician who supplies her with bodies. That's not really a very good description of the plot. It's really that there's a cult of other necrophiles that's sort of trying to bring her in. The mortician's kind of bringing her into the whole thing.
Yeah, and this one is our first West Coast entry, and it
Yeah.
feels like almost like a TV soap opera aesthetic for like something that is dealing with necrophilia and like occult kind of you know murderous cults. I think this one was one that I saw through. Was it Code Red had a DVD of this, and then I actually got to see it on the
Yeah.
big screen a couple of years ago in Philly. But it's one that just always kind of stuck with me because of its kind of strange melancholy story, and like it has this kind of like almost kind of like like this TV movie-ish kind of pretty music, and but it has this very graphic street hustler murder in the opening act that feels like from another tone entirely as far
Yeah.
as like it, the I don't know what to really spoil, but I mean, there's somebody that like you think it's like a gay cruising kind of scenario, but
Right.
then it turns wrong.
It's actually a really interesting scene. I was going to talk about that later, but since you brought it up, I think it's a really interesting scene in that it doesn't feel judgmental of either character. And later we learn that it's going to be a murder, and that the guy picking up is the mortician, and he wants to kill this guy. But it initially feels like a relatively safe scene between a gay sex worker and a client, that like they're both like really chill about the whole thing. And it feels progressive in a way I seriously doubt it meant to feel progressive in. But it's just like it feels pro sex worker until the guy like until you realize, oh shit, that's he's taking him in, and that's an autopsy table. That's not a he told the guy he's a vet, but that's an autopsy table. He's not a vet. And we know that the concept of the movie by this point, so we shouldn't be surprised. But I'd seen this movie before and mostly forgot about it. I think I must have seen it while I was out of the hospital or something and just not able to pay attention. But it kind of caught me off guard. I'm like, is there like a side plot about a gay hustler in this movie that I forgot about? And then he gets horrible. I mean, not graphic in the way that you think, like not like George Romero graphic where there's guts and stuff, but like really horrible murder scene where he gets embalmed while he's alive.
Yeah, I think the scene I always think of is the one of the murders in Tourist Trap from David Schmoller, where like
Hmm.
someone is dying, like, and they know that they're dying on a table,
Yeah.
and it's kind of prolonged and kind of hard to forget. Yeah, I mean that is maybe like this is a film that has that one really bold murder scene, but is mostly just a very morbid soap opera.
Yeah, well,
um,
I learned about it from Kirla Janice's book, House of Psychotic Women, which I don't know if we said last time we talked, but I actually got that book not realizing it was autobiographical. I thought it was just a critical look at like feminist horror movies, and then like I got really into it. I was like, oh, I see what's going. But she talks about it in there. And the thing I'm stealing from her here is that she refers to it as ultimately a romantic melodrama dressed up like a body exploitation movie, and
yeah,
that's absolutely the appeal. And that's like, as soon as I read that, I'm like, yeah, that's and well, you said it too, but that's what's going on here.
yeah. I mean, I think the only exploitation film it really reminds me of is Toys Are Not for Children, which I'm sure Kayla also writes about.
And I also have, and I had just seen that because it came out on, well, not just, but a little while ago. I saw that on Arrow Video, and that, so again, in my notes, the movie I was going to bring up was Stanley Brasloff's Toys Are Not for Children. Well, I mean, there's a little bit of The Witch Who Came from the Sea, which we covered in the last one, and then Patrick and I actually covered again just recently when we talked about our 101 scariest movie moments.
Mm.
I picked the sort of drugged out murder scene from that movie. Yeah, Toys Are Not for Children has no necrophilia or graphic violence, but it's so embroiled in incest and the concept of pedophilia that I found it way more disturbing than this movie.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really like this movie has those melodrama moments where you can kind of pull yourself out of how grotty it is. Whereas
yeah.
that one just feels like it never lets up, and it ends up feeling like more disturbing than most horror movies are.
Well, it's funny because I remember I interviewed Bill Lustig once, and
Hmm.
he and I talked about the difference between East Coast and West Coast adult films, and what he was saying was that like there was like a certain kind of a like maybe like a kind of a Catholic guilt thing or like a grimy thing to the East Coast films. Like there was like a darkness to them, whereas the West Coast films were like sunshine and good-looking people and like kind of almost like a TV-ish kind of aesthetic.
Hmm.
And he preferred, I think, the East Coast feel. But I think about like that description of genre filmmaking and applying it to this, because this does feel like very kind of standard compositions. Like there's almost no. I think compared to almost everything else we're talking about, like there's very little stylistic idiosyncrasy other than maybe some of that
Hmm.
slow motion, like the flashback kind of stuff is kind of some arty touches, but for the most part, it's covered like a TV movie, which makes the necrophilia and incest themes that much more kind of surprising because they feel almost more kind of like subversive in that context to me than if it was done in kind of a way that was like knowingly edgy.
Yeah, yeah, you can't compare this to like Necromantic. I mean, they
No.
couldn't get away with Necromantic in 1972, but I feel like this does. I mean, there's plenty of full frontal nudity and there's a lot of blood and stuff, and I feel like it when it does go for it, it goes for it about as far as you could with a movie that I'm guessing was planning on having a wide release of some kind, not like super wide, but you know. I don't think they wanted to get banned in any states or anything, so they don't push it that far. But because it feels like this made for TV romantic drama for so much of it, it really does sort of make it even more shocking when this kind of stuff does happen. I,
Yeah,
I
no,
made a note to myself wondering if it was maybe partially meant as a parody. It doesn't feel like it's designed as a parody, but it seems sort of knowingly funny at times, about the things it's doing.
I don't know. I mean, I get the impression from listening to the producer talk about it that it was meant to be a shocking
Hmm.
film, like a shocking horror film.
I
But
guess I
yeah.
guess the part that throws me off is it has this it's this what it is it's to me I read it as a movie she's not necessarily a necrophile, and the movie is really non-judgmental about kinks and stuff. It really pushes that the murder is the bad part, and that she is not a bad person because she wants to kiss dead bodies, and that she might not even be a necrophile but just someone who has got an absolutely debilitating electra complex, is trying to connect with her dead father. Again, you spend the whole movie after, especially after seeing Toys Are Not for Children, you spend the whole movie waiting for the final proof that her father was an incest rapist or something, and it never comes.
Yeah. Well, I
It's
mean, there's similar stories in that they're both about women that enter into loveless marriages or like physical love making
yeah.
marriages because of their kind of neurosis and like the husband's kind of frustration and confusion because she won't talk about it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and I mean,
yeah.
and the husband isn't even a bad guy in this. He tries. He tries throughout the movie to sort of like more than you would expect from a low budget 70s movie about such a thing. There's like one scene where he storms off cuz she won't have sex with him, but he's not even that mean about it. It's kind of that part also catches me a little off guard.
Yeah, well, I mean, his like the scene where it's revealed what's happening with her is such a strange scene too. I
I think that there's also the other thing that ties it to Toys Are Not for Children is that she is infantilized when she kind of gets into her bad headspace. And besides this being kind of the perfect movie for what we're talking about, especially the woman protagonist being this person who's just like floating in and out of life and doesn't even know what she wants, and it's like these movies are a lot of them are about women who are on the cusp of a midlife crisis, and that's an interesting thing that you definitely didn't see in the 80s and 90s. It may be a little bit more recently, but that being a sort of standby for horror movies was interesting. And what I was thinking is at the same time, you hardly ever see those women infantilized. They're instead like they're so crazy that you have to be careful around them, is sort of the way that the other characters approach them.
Yeah, I mean, it's always unusual to like have an exploitation film that I mean definitely sexualizes the protagonist, but also does kind of see them as an innocent that they they're it's on their side. I think Which You Came from the Sea is a little bit like that too, where it's like
Yeah.
on the one hand it's kind of sexual, but it's also kind of sorry for her.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think
Yeah.
it's a very judgmental movie. I don't know if that's just because it was made and they didn't make it correctly and they meant it to be, but there are so many scenes of her that just aren't judgmental at all about what she's doing, but are judgmental of the weird cult that's doing like weird shit and skinning bodies and having
Yeah, I
having their
think the murder and just the non-consensual nature of the cult
yeah,
is villainized, but I don't think her her kinks are really shown as anything other than just something that she's kind of alienated, and you feel sorry for her that she's alienated from everyone else around her because of it.
yeah,
But it's similar to Death by Invitation in that male sexual advances are we're not on their side when men
yeah,
are too aggressive with her. Like we see that they're chauvinists, that they're in the wrong. So in
yeah.
that sense, that it is again, like it's hard to know like how intentional the feminism is in some of these films, but I mean it's the only way I can read it now.
Yeah, and well, another way she's different from a lot of these characters, like I feel like I don't remember the name of the character in Images, but Jessica and Let's Scare Jessica to Death, is that she has when she's outside of her obsessions, she like has a very active social life and is like really easygoing. She's not constantly tortured by whatever's going on in her brain, which is another one of those things that makes it feel like two different films being kind of slammed into each other.
That's a good point. Yeah, no. I mean, she is someone that can throw a party, but then she needs that alone time to be with dead bodies.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that Christine said, well, because yeah, we did watch this one together, is that she kept on thinking that the main character was supposed to be sort of a Sharon Tate type, and
Hmm.
I didn't necessarily see it like that, but there's definitely a bit of that post Manson family satanic panic thing going on throughout the movie, and that she's being seduced into this cult that is definitely Manson esque in certain ways,
I think that's totally right. Yeah, and I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. The ritualistic killing and the stabbing and all that is
and that they're
definitely a post,
hippies. They're
and
they're
that they're hippies. Yeah,
dirty, horrible hippies.
yeah. Well, the hippie thing is definitely something that comes up in a few of these. But
Hmm.
that is definitely something I hadn't considered. But you're right, because I don't think of I think of Manson, in a few other films that from this period, like I Drink Your Blood, but not this one. But yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely see it now that you say it.
And I recognized Wilcox, the
Mary
actress
Wilcox.
Mary Wilcox, and I she's from SCTV. And so she doesn't quite have the same chops that the actress we were just talking about has. So I'm not sure if she has it in her for such a complex character. She's not bad. And it's just that it feels like of these movies, this is one that you could get away with remaking and build on,
Yeah.
with a stronger central performance and modern ideas going
Yeah,
on.
I think that this is one where the approach to that subject matter might be the cause of the cult
Hmm.
following that it has. I don't know that it's one of the stronger films we're talking about today, but I've always found it really kind of compelling in a weird way.
Yeah, I didn't do a search to see what was the first movie to have necrophilia. It explicitly stated necrophilia, not just like implied, like vampire movies.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the first one was, but this got to be pretty high on the first list, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of intimated in what is it, like horrible Dr. Hitchcock,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but not like this.
No,
Um, yeah, did you ever see a movie called Kissed from the '90s, the Canadian independent film?
no, I did not.
That probably is, one of the more atypically sensitive kind of pictures that dealt with necrophilia. I think it comes out around the same time as things like Crash, the Cronenberg
Mm,
film. So I remember
hmm.
it getting kind of a fair amount of attention at the time. It seems to have kind of disappeared in recent years, but I think if you can find that, that might make an interesting kind of co-feature with that. Although that one is probably a little bit more accomplished technically than this. I mean, this
Hmm.
is, a first time, last time filmmakers
Yeah.
went effort did a horror movie, but I don't know. I've always just, yeah, I just think that, if you're looking for idiosyncratic kind of outlier kind of 70s horror, I mean, this is definitely one that you won't forget it if you see it. I don't think.
The last thing here I had is that the husband
Mhm.
is played by Lyle Wagoner, and I used to have this image of, because he's kind of a heartthrob. He was Steve Trevor on the Wonder Woman TV show, but
Mm.
he was kind of a heartthrob, and I just have this image of when the video, VHS first starts out, somebody who's a fan of him on whatever their favorite TV show is at the time in the 80s, seeking out this movie because they hear it has him in sex scenes. And then just seeing him stabbed to death by necrophiles and wondering what the fuck they make of it. I always like the idea of someone looking up, like there was all that talk back when the Cronenberg movie with that came out that had all the Twilight fans watched,
Robert Pattinson.
that had Robert Pattinson in it, and
Right. Cosmopolis. Yeah.
yeah, Cosmo.
I would think that at a certain point that teeny bopper kind of fan base he picked up from Twilight probably would have been thrown off by all the art films he made in the wake of that, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Maybe they grew up with it. He made them into cool film fans.
I'd love that to be the case, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Cosmopolis is not an easy film, so I mean that would be
No,
pretty impressive.
honestly, I'll be 100% honest. I don't know if I even like it, to tell you the truth. It's not my it's hard. It's a hard watch. And then the only other thing is I had the evil mortician is
Mm.
played by Timothy Scott, who is just absolutely fantastic character type actor, and he's in The Gang and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So Patrick and his partner and I are planning on watching that as our midnight countdown movie, and Christine are planning on watching that as our midnight countdown movie for New Year's. So I'm gonna look real hard to find the evil murderous mortician in the background of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Nice. I had no idea he was in that.
Yeah,
I know
I mean
that
he's
this
got a look. I'm not gonna be able to miss him now that I know what he looks like.
Yeah. Well, this one, this is the first one that we're talking about that has an AKA, and
Oh
it's
yeah, yeah.
Secrets of the Death Room was how this also got released, which is kind of an odd title.
Yeah, I mean it's like that title Love Me Deadly tells you one kind of. Oh, the other thing I forgot is this movie has like a James Bond theme as its title song. Like it absolutely sounds like a James Bond theme. I'm going to have to find it, and I usually put a song at the end of every episode. And I don't tell the listener what the song is. It's just like an Easter egg for the what we talked about, but this song is definitely going to be at the end of the episode because it's so wild to hear this just over the top Bond song for this melodrama about a necrophile.
Well, that's something that I also noticed looking at the list is that a lot of these have theme songs.
Yeah, that was a thing. Well, I remember when we watched rewatching Season of the Witch, I was shocked that they were able to use the Donovan song Season of the Witch. I was like, how could that not be out of their price range? But I guess it just wasn't as expensive to
Yeah, but
to
that was a pre-existing hit. Donovan
pre-existing.
didn't write that for George
Yeah.
Romero, whereas a lot of these have original theme songs.
Yeah, I mean a big production. Paul Moody. Phil Moody is the name of the composer.
Okay.
And he didn't do much else. He did Three Nuts in Search of a Bolt is the only other credit he's got on here,
Yeah,
which
well,
is
once you have that 3 nuts from a bolt money,
yeah, I mean
you don't need to work again
there's
after that.
almost 10 years between the two of them too, 64 to 72. It's crazy. But yeah, that's what I got on this one. Like we mentioned, it's hard to find. Maybe it will get a release, a bigger release soon.
That is out on Blu-ray.
Oh yeah, that one's out on Blu-ray. I fucked it up. It was the last one that was hard to find. This one's on Blu-ray. This one's easy to find. What company is it? Is this also Vinegar Syndrome?
That's Scorpion.
Scorpion.
So it might be out through Kino Lorber
For
if they
Kino. Yeah,
I
yeah.
I think. But yeah, you can this one has a Blu-ray release. It looks great. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I ended up watching now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does look good. So then the next movie is the first one I had never heard of that you gave to me. My Brother Has Bad Dreams from 1972.
Mhm.
And this is directed by Robert J. Emery, who apparently has no relation to the drill sergeant turned actor Ronald Lee Emery. But I was
No.
hopeful. I was hopeful.
This one was one that I think I heard of it because Stephen Thrower is, whenever he gets around to completing Nightmare USA 2, there was going to be a chapter on the films of Robert J. Emery. And
Hmm.
I know that he is also a fan of My Brother Has Bad Dreams. Confusingly, there's another film with the same title as its other
Other,
AKA
yep.
Scream Bloody Murder. which is from that same year, I think, too. So
It was released a year later, but it was based, yeah, Mark B. Ray. And it's
yes.
actually something Patrick and I covered on the very first episode of Genre Grinder, which I don't want people to go back and listen to because I didn't know what I was doing. But we did a proto slasher episode, and
Hmm.
that was one of the ones we picked because that was something I'd watched in the old VHS days with the big box that said like the first movie rated X or for gorenography, and it's
Oh,
not actually a particularly violent movie, but it's funny because they actually have a lot in common. So there's like, if you go by the Scream Bloody Murder title, I can see how it would create a lot of confusion.
well, I want to say that maybe even the Psychotronic encyclopedia, like one of the books out there, combined elements from both films in
It did,
the
yeah,
council review.
interesting. They
Yeah.
couldn't remember which one they watched.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, this one, I know this is the one that you're the most mixed on, but I mean, I've always found this one kind of hard to forget. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree it has some problems, but I think
It is
well,
technically superior to the other Scream Bloody Murder. I'll say that much. That
yeah.
movie's very trashy.
Well, read the synopsis for this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this one, the according to Letterbox, it is the odd, unhealthy relationship between a psychologically damaged man and his sister is upended by the arrival of a mysterious drifter, which is exactly what happens. That one's a good description of what's going on in this movie.
Yeah.
To the point where if that sounds like a familiar story to you, that's because this is kind of a familiar, like it feels like a version of something you've heard before. I can't, the closest I could come is say that they're, this and the other Scream Bloody Murder are clearly inspired by Psycho, but they aren't structurally any, they don't have anything in common with Psycho. That's just the idea that their main characters are kind of men with dead parents with mommy and daddy issues, you know,
Yeah.
that's pretty much. And this guy looks a little bit, I think they're trying to make him look a little tiny bit like Norman Bates, but that's about as far as that actual comparison goes.
Yeah, yeah. And you could also probably compare it not only to Psycho, but to maybe a little bit of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a little bit of
Mm,
Willard.
yep.
But yeah, like that kind of like pitiable loner psycho protagonist kind of character. It's Nick Kleinholtz the third is that character, and he died the year after this was made.
Hmm.
Um, he was in another Robert J. Emery film I have a fondness for called I think it was made as Sign of Aquarius, but I have it under the title Ghetto Freaks through something weird. But
Mm,
he's somebody that I think came from Ohio, but like did a lot of films in Florida. And this is a Tampa, Florida production. Thinking about like the last episode we did, this is the same year that Death Dream was also shooting down there, which
okay.
also has a disturbed young man in a family home, and also has a chatty World War II vet mailman.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah, that's
to the point
true.
where I had to look him up and make sure they weren't the same actor,
Because
which
yeah, that
would have
would.
been a weird shared universe. But no, it's. I think that it has pacing problems. I think it feels way too long, but
Yeah,
uh, but it has like so many offbeat kind of touches to it, let alone the last 15 minutes, which are genuinely surreal.
yeah.
Um,
It's another one, like we're I'm gonna say made for TV movie a million times in this podcast. This
mm,
one actually goes even further and almost feels like a soap opera episode that's just gone wrong, and it's like
yes.
weirdly heightened, and it's almost campy in some of its performances, heavy handed in all of its stuff. It almost feels like an unknowing parody of a daytime soap. But as you said, then it eventually, like, once there's like a point when the crazy goes into overdrive and somehow the characters feel more rational when that starts happening. It's that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but if you've seen the movie, like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical kind of, melodrama where like a, young guy, he from the very first scene, he's, believes that the dead mother is alive. It's not like a twist to
No,
reveal that he's it's playing up the psycho thing from the very first scenes.
right.
He has like a mannequin, and he has a like a habit of like taking mannequins home and like talking to them. So it's already kind of knowingly in the same vein as something like Psycho. It's not trying to pull a twist with that. But then, yeah, it is like a triangle dynamic where he has kind of like like an incestual kind of dynamic with the sister. It's actually
Yeah.
incest is actually in quite a few of these films now that
Yeah,
I
it
think
was
about it.
something that disturbed people, I guess, and they needed to throw it into a lot of these films.
Yeah, just trying to amp up perversity.
Yep.
That's kind of something that they throw in there. But yeah, it's I think like Love Me Deadly, it has like a very kind of gentle, syrupy kind of musical score as a counterpoint to the weirdness.
Mhm.
And yeah, parts of it are very TV movie-ish, but then other parts of it are almost kind of like Kenneth Anger or Curtis Harrington style, kind of exaggerated like angles and colored gels, and gets like very kind of avant-garde with his like kind of fantasy life, like
Yeah.
dreaming about the parents, dreaming about like things in the room. Like it's not a film, given that title, it's not a film that really deals in like dream sequences so much, but just that the character is kind of haunted by their fantasies. I mean, it's one of several films we're talking about that has like a schizophrenic killer character, and so it's just kind of like a character that kind of wanders in and out of rationality. But it is kind
D
of more like a melodrama, again, like Love Me Deadly, and I actually like a few of these films are like more like melodramas, which is why they, you've got to be probably in the right mood for them, for them to not feel like a little bit too slow paced, I guess. But
Yeah, well, you're saying about the stylized there is one dream sequence, and what it made me think of was the, Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies, which each have that one weird Technicolor nightmare scene that was like that they would sort of throw in just one scene where they'd be all crazy and wild. It kind of reminded me of that idea where we're going to have one really over the top dream sequence and then the rest of the movie, and then that's also sort of a turning point for the movie too. I think that like after that then it's a little bit harder to separate what's real and what's not. You're kind of more in the guy's mindset after that.
yeah, I also thought it was kind of unusual. Like, there's a fair amount of homoeroticism to that movie.
I have a note saying I think this is the first movie we talked about that had a homoerotic angle to it. I can't really think of that in any of the other ones, other than the fact that the guy in the main actor in Messiah of Evil is a gay performer, but he doesn't play a gay character in that movie.
No,
So
no. If anything, he plays kind of like a Lothario dandy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, there's one scene that's just dripping with homoeroticism, like to the point where it's not even subtext. It's very close to being the text, at least for the main character. It's text, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's just it's not really kind of overly dwelt upon either. It's just like kind of
No,
like an odd flavor to that, to give that scene like an even different, more unexpected feeling.
it's also a movie where the seductive drifter, which is a good trope for like, I mean, we're the last movie we're gonna talk about, our second to last movie is Death Game, which that is entirely what that's about. But that's
Mhm.
like a common thing here. But what's interesting about I think that that's part of the home invasion thing. I
Mhm.
think that, and there's also some really early gialli, like the Umberto Lenzi gialli, are about drifter or two drifters coming into your house, and you think they're cool because they're sexy, and then they ruin your whole life. This is a case where he's actually not just harmless, but he seems like he's a stabilizing element for, or he is at first a stabilizing element for the brother and sister, and he's really understanding of the brothers. He has these pretty massive breakdowns where he doesn't know what's happening and has and freaks out and stuff, and he helps him through them. He's actually a really nice guy, and I kept on waiting for the other shoe to drop, but he really the whole movie is a good person.
Yeah, that's Paul Vincent. I don't think their IMDb profiles are connected, but I want to say that's the same actor that's the lead in Ghetto Freaks. That is the earlier
Mm,
Emery film where he's like a kind of like a countercultural figure. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's typecasting on his part, but yeah, that he does. He is kind of he is the recurring lead actor in the two films of Emery that I have seen. And yeah, it is kind of unusual, kind of like the sympathetic biker. I mean, I guess that is a post Easy Rider touch as well. That
yeah.
the sympathetic drifter kind of kind of like trying not to get tied down and kind of getting wrapped up in like the most complicated domestic dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, it's something he definitely should have just left as soon as he came in and saw what was happening. Uh,
Yeah, but I think that I mean, like, this is one of the films where I feel like it could maybe be turned into a play. I mean, it might be
mhm.
like a very morbid kind of play, but I mean, it does feel like so set bound to that
Mhm.
one house, that one location. that it does feel like a almost like a stage play. And but I think that the performances are kind of what keep it from. I mean, to the degree that it works. I mean, I think it kind of works, but I think it's partly because of those performances, as well as kind of like the odd touches in the direction. Although the stage would not capture the weirdness of the ending, which
Right, which I think I feel safe because it's so out there that I actually feel safe spoiling the ending in this case
okay.
as long as you are. But
Well,
yeah,
it's a non sequitur type ending,
yeah, and
but not in a not like in a twist reveal of some kind of
no,
it's not like a twist plot element. It's just the entire thing becomes like kind of like a hallucination.
yeah, that I should say around character's name. I wrote it down. Carl. Carl
Yeah.
has this almost epiphany around the hour mark, and like, sort of gets out of his fugue state, and he schemes and he turns on everyone, and there's some really uncomfortable scenes where he's like suddenly aware enough to speak about his problems, and it's like, oh my god, it's a situation where you've been talking shit about someone and you suddenly realize they understood what you were saying the whole time. But then he kills them, and he steals the motorcycle, and he's leaving, and the scene, like, you think this is the end of the movie, and and suddenly a cop inexplicably pulls him over, which I don't know if maybe the motorcycle was listed as stolen, but I can't imagine there's any reason the cop has to pull him
Well, no,
over.
no, he's pulling him over because he's driving around with a mannequin on his motorcycle.
He just thinks it's crazy, and I don't know if there's a law against that, but I
Well,
guess,
it's
yeah,
Florida, they're
you might
judgmental
want
there.
to you might want to check it out. But it leads to this really over the top, like, I thought that was gonna be the end of the movie. Like, oh, he got caught, the end. But no, it leads to this really over the top car crash or car chase where the cop crashes his car and it explodes.
Yes.
And then Carl just goes on his way. Again, oh, that must be the end of the movie. Um, but then he jumps into water to either commit suicide or just swim away from the life,
No,
again.
he cuts his wrists first.
Oh, does
So
he see?
it's a
Oh,
deliberate act of suicide. He jumps into the water, and then the blood in the water brings in sharks.
out of just sharks attack him, but it's all like stills.
Yes.
uh, and yeah, I didn't see him cut. There's a problem with watching a VHS rip of this on YouTube, is that I didn't catch that he cut his wrist. It's not a very good
Well, it's a very
transfer.
elliptically rendered kind of wrist
Yeah.
cutting. It's not like they have a shot of razors. It's just like it's just implied through the action if you rewatch it. I want to say it might still be on there. I mean, this film comes and goes from YouTube. I actually had to buy a DVD-R through ioffer.com, the late lamented ioffer.com, because I was
Yeah.
trying to find it and it was not on those usual gray market channels, but there was a VHS rip that I bought as a DVD-R. But I remember that ending was always on YouTube, isolated
Yeah.
from the rest of the film because people just found that ending so batshit.
It's just, and there's nothing else in the movie to say that that's how this movie's gonna end. There's just there's no way. It's like, yeah, it's not just crazy, but it's like crazy in a way that this movie hasn't prepared you for crazy.
Yeah. Well, but even like the notion of a car chase with a cop chasing him it's all like they're driving about like 30 miles an hour at most. Like it's not like an action scene in a
No.
conventional sense. It's just like this kind of doomy matter of fact kind of procession. Uh I remember I did find some newspaper articles about this film from like Florida, like local coverage, and I remember they had like the overturned cop car, like making it look like an action an action movie.
Boy, oof,
But
that disappointed some folks.
yes, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know like to what extent it really played outside of like that region.
Hmm.
And I think it initially came out as Scream Bloody Murder, but I've always kind of loved the title. My Brother Has Bad Dreams, and it's kind of more memorable.
Hmm.
I don't think this has ever had a DVD release, let alone a Blu-ray release, and I'm not even sure who owns it at this point.
Yeah.
I know Robert J. Emery is an author now, and like you can find his webpage. I've almost written him a few times. I don't know if he wants to talk about these films.
Right.
Um, but I mean, well, he did talk to Stephen Thrower, I guess, at one point, so maybe he's open to it. But he made a lot of films. A lot of them are considered lost films. I mean, this one and Ghetto Freaks are not hard to find. I think there's one other one. Is it Ride in a Pink Car? There's one other one that you can find, but there's a few. There's one with Claudia Jennings that's lost. I mean, there's a few things he made that like, but he just felt like the like a young kind of wunderkind kind of, independent filmmaker in the early 70s. And this is just one of his many films from that period. But I
It's
think,
it's funny if you look at his letterbox thing. If you click on his name,
yeah,
it's a whole bunch of those AFI the directors episodes.
that's right. He directed a whole those, yeah,
So
directors.
he must, if assuming he did the interviews, he talked to Cronenberg, Scorsese, Craven, Corman. Yeah.
That's interesting. I forgot about that. I should reach out to him. I interviewed somebody that auditioned for Ghetto Freaks.
Hmm.
And because that was Michael J. Weldon, who later created Psychotronic. He was part of a cattle call audition for Ghetto Freaks. Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't want to oversell this film. I mean, obviously, I think will speak up for those that find it a little bit underwhelming in some places. But I think it's just one that I think if you watch it late at night in the right circumstances, it has that kind of a quirky, memorable feeling. I think, but
I think just be ready for the first hour to not really grab you is the best way to put it.
or like be a slow paced melodrama with like weird interruptions of surrealism.
Yeah. And I would say double featuring it with Scream Bloody Murder might actually be really interesting.
Yeah.
The other movies it reminded me of that I can't really connect it to necessarily is I Dismember Mama
Mm,
and The Baby. I don't know
yes.
why, but something about it just made me think of those two movies.
Yeah, well, the years between Psycho and Halloween, where they're trying to find a way to tap into that psycho killer format. I mean, a few of
Hmm.
the things we're talking about today are going to be within that tradition of like, how do we tap into this apparent like mania for like real life serial killer type, threats in
Yeah.
cinema? Do we make them the focus? Do we make the victims the focus? And it wasn't until they really kind of like brought in kind of an almost supernatural monster component by making the killer masked and almost otherworldly that it really kind of took on a whole new direction in the slasher era. But like this whole time of the unmasked killer and the babbling psychopath, kind of cliche. I mean, that's something that you get in a few of these. And this one, I mean, I do find that performance kind of oddly memorable. I mean, he does seem,
Hmm.
and he's like the director of Love Me Deadly, really a school teacher. He was not like someone that came from the film world.
It's also interesting as someone who watches a lot of Gialli that the Europeans were also trying to get into that psycho mindset, and they took a if you look at the American and European, mostly Italian movies from this, they're completely different takes on the same basic idea. And then at a certain point, slashers hit, and then everybody kind of agrees on what they're doing.
Yeah, well, that Gialli thing is like, I mean, that Agatha Christie whodunit component, I
Hmm.
think, is something that, yeah,
The,
is
the
is
the
the real
American movies
bridge
didn't really,
between Psycho and
yeah,
Halloween.
and the American movies didn't really care about that for quite a while. They
No,
weren't really
that's you don't find a
interested
lot
in
of
it.
whodunits in horror, other than like
Um,
twist endings, like the William Castle kind of stuff. But even that is like a different kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. So, let's move on
Mm.
to another even sillier movie here with George Barry's Deathbed from 1973. We were gonna talk about this one on the first podcast, but I lost my voice completely. It turned out I had a thyroid problem, and I had to have it removed not too long after that. Um, but I thought I was just sick at the time. But yeah, I don't know if anybody listened to that podcast. And again, I get really froggy towards the end. But that was how we were going to end. I think one of the other one. I guess, but that doesn't make sense because we weren't going. I don't know. We ended up cutting Deathbed for some reason.
Yes.
I think it's just because it's so weird that it almost doesn't even fit with the already weird shit we're talking about.
Yeah, Deathbed was one that yeah, it's the outlier in that it's a Detroit, Michigan film,
Hmm.
filmed in the Garwood Mansion. Yeah, and it was it started in 72, finished 5 years later. Yeah, I think that this one is and this is the one that was turned into a play. Oh, actually, I didn't catch it, but I was in Wilmington, North Carolina when the Gwennifer Roller did a play version of it in 2014 that I've not known. I don't know anyone that saw that, so I have
That
no idea how
recorded
well
it
it
or
translates to
anything.
the stage. It seems like a hard film to to uh, to
Yeah.
adapt for the stage, but it is primarily rooted in that one location.
Yeah.
What's the synopsis for this one on
Well,
Letterboxd?
I'm actually looking forward to this. At the edge of a grand estate near a crumbling old mansion lies a strange stone building with just a single room. In that room lies a bed. Born of the demonic power, the bed seeks flesh, blood, and life essence from unwary travelers. Three pretty girls arrive on vacation, searching for a place to spend the night. Instead, they tumble into nightmares and the cruel, insatiable hunger of the bed. And that's like only half the story. I think that a lot of people know about this movie. They, either they were trading tapes in the bootleg VHS era and they saw it there, or they read about it in Nightmare USA. But most likely they heard about it because Patton Oswalt had a very extended joke about the absurdity of the title. I don't know if you've ever heard that bit.
I have heard it. He gets the title slightly wrong, but it's
Yeah, he
close
calls
enough.
it deathbed, the bed that eats people. Is what it's the deathbed, the bed that eats. He added the people on the end.
Yeah.
He correctly noted that it had just been released on DVD at the time. But he claims the basis of that movie is an evil dead that eats people, and then he kind of makes up a backstory for the bed that doesn't quite fit with what happens in it. But most of the joke is describing the ridiculous situation that led a movie producer to think that Barry's movie was a good idea. I'm sure he's seen it. Patton Oswalt seems like a guy who watches B movie. He has a joke about Tombs of the Blind Dead. I mean, he's got to be the kind of guy who would watch it, and I think that he would like it because it's just so audacious and fucking weird. This one is has the methodology of an art film, but then again, it's one that feels like it's either an intended parody because it is supposed to be funny at
Yes.
times, but I don't know if it's a parody of art films or just a parody of weird shit just happening kind of parody,
I
like a
it's
spoof.
yeah, I don't think it's quite like a spoof, but it is intentionally funny. I
Yeah.
mean, but then parts of it are also kind of like oddly poetic in a way that I think is intentional. So it does
Hmm.
have that strange balance of like deliberate artiness and deliberate kind of like, countercultural humor, like
Yeah.
it does feel kind of like, yeah, like that weird blend of tones is kind of what makes it so unique. I mean, it isn't like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes kind of territory.
Right.
Like it's not just declaring like because it's like there's a character who narrates a lot of it, like trapped behind, was it behind a mirror? Um,
It's behind an illustration. It's a artist who got eaten by the bed, and the bed, they don't know why the bed has trapped his ghost within the painting basically, and
that's right,
so
it's a
he's just
painting.
and
But so
but they keep calling it a painting, but it's clearly an ink drawing, and I don't know why that bothered me, but it did bother me that it was clearly an ink drawing. But he's the narrator for the he does a lot of heavy lifting as far as story goes.
right, well, that's a thing because I mean, it opens kind of like Jaws,
Hmm.
where it's like you have the two lovers, go off and then they're killed by the unexpected kind of monstrous threat, but it has a lot of exposition through the voiceover of this character from who lives behind the painting.
Yeah.
And I think that component is what really kind of threw me when I first saw it, because I think I was expecting it to be, oh, it's, people go in the room in the bed, and like how weird is that going to be? Like, oh, it's a monster bed. It doesn't seem like that outlandish, but it's like the almost seriousness of like the all of this kind of backstory and exposition that
Hmm.
that makes it like that much weirder. And even just the way that victims are killed by the thing, because it's like they slip into, it almost feels like a vat of acid, like House on Haunted
Hmm.
Hill, or like quicksand. Like the way that they're absorbed and digested by the bed. I mean, I guess you could be referencing things like the Blob as well, but
Yeah,
it's
the bed doesn't like have a big maw. It just has digestive fluids, basically. So,
yeah, like they
yeah,
just sink within it and then are absorbed in it, and then it's but it like it's the kind of acid that like if you dip your hands into it and pull them back, you have skeleton hands.
right,
Like
right.
it's like a surreal kind of nightmare logic kind of threat to it. But yeah, I think I mean you have, what is it, like eat Pepto Bismol at one point after eating the priest or something? Like I mean
Yeah,
it's,
it gets a stomach ache.
yeah, so it's that, and it also has like a fair amount of nudity and exploitation elements too. Like
Hmm.
it's probably more of a full-on exploitation film than a few of the films we're talking about as
Hmm.
far as the sex and violence. But Yeah, and it's also, I guess kind of you could say it's maybe casually episodic as far as like there's not really A to B to C plot. Like it's, I mean, characters do arrive at or deal with the threat, but it's not like you stick with one main character throughout the journey.
I mean, like, I defy anybody to remember any character's name in this movie. Like,
Right.
even in the flashbacks, they never have names. The ghost is always describing them as just the people that they are. I don't think he ever gives any of them names. And it's like yeah, like you said, the first scene feels a bit like a Saturday Night Live skit. Like, haha, it's eating all their food, but then just that's all it gives you as far as that goes. It doesn't really go back to that level of haha after that. The backstory is really complex. I tried to write it down. The legend is a tree demon becomes a breeze and it falls in love with a human. It creates the bed to seduce her, and then accidentally endows the bed with both his and her essences, which brings it to life. But then the bed is also in control of this weird little room it's in, and it can do all sorts of other stuff. It can give people, and the way it kills people really is by giving them nightmares while they're asleep and then eat them. So it's like a way of torturing its food.
Yeah, like
Um,
I feel like if you brought like a game of Mad Libs to a Ren fair
yeah,
and told them to write a horror movie, like that's kind of the feeling it has. Like it feels like it has too much information that just connects in a very like unusual way.
like you can't call it high concept because it has like 30 concepts and they're all overlapping. That's like the high concept is supposed to be like one, maybe two concepts that you
Yeah.
count as your high concept.
Well, it's the strange, quirky ambition of it that feels
Uh-huh.
like what makes it kind of stand out. Like it's like I said, like something like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes or other kind of like broad horror comedies that come in the 80s where you have a lot of horror comedy. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
have that tone at all. Like it is closer to like Messiah of Evil with jokes.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, like it does have that kind of like an arty sensibility to it. I mean, I don't know too much about Barry's influences as far as what cinema he was drawing upon. Like I've heard the commentary, but I don't recall that particular detail. But like yeah, it feels like completely dreamt up from one fevered imagination. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like I don't know. I mean,
It might be part of like what you said. It took so long to come out. Maybe it was one of those movies that was only shot on weekends. So like they maybe were making up shit as they were going along and editing on the fly, and that's why it's so disjointed.
yeah,
Like
I think
it
so.
it, it sort of seems like a story a little kid would tell, where it's and then this happened, and then this, and then you were there, and then you had a sword, and it just kind of goes on and on. The the thing that the note I made to myself this time, because I'd watched this before when it came out on Blu-ray and I reviewed it and I really enjoyed it. This is the first time I'd watched it in many years. And I keep describing again as made for TV melodramas that become horror films. There's something about Deathbed that feels like a made for TV children's special, or at times it feels like an extended Sesame Street sketch. You know those like Sesame Street bits that were made by completely different studios. There was all those shows did that. Pinwheel did that. I can't remember the other shows like that off the top of my head, but they would always have these little things that they bought, that like the Children's Television Network would buy little animated clips or stuff like that. There's something about the way that the story's told that feels like, I also thought of fairy tale theater, but it's not quite right. That's not quite what I'm going for. There's no Muppets, so it can't be Storyteller or Sesame Street, but like there's some sort of vibe that's going through it that reminds me of when I was really little in the early 80s, watching what was essentially made the decade before on TV as a short or something that played between commercials on Nickelodeon or something like that. It reminds me of all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's not scary in a horror movie
No,
way, but
I mean there are a couple scenes that the part where where the woman has her legs go into it and get dissolved, and then she tries to crawl away, and then she gets sort of dragged back by a supernatural force. That has a sort of Nightmare on Elm Street scariness to it. Like it didn't scare me, but like I can see
yeah,
that
no,
that's something you'd see in a
it
horror movie.
it has, yeah, it has a few suspenseful moments like that. I mean, I do think of that scene with the girl trying to escape for sure. But those are not like it's it's rare to have those moments of tension. Like it's almost more played for comedy or strangeness.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I would really say that it's quite as far out as Eraserhead, but I also thought of Eraserhead as far as films that were kind of made on the weekends over the course of half a decade and have like a very peculiar sensibility about them that seem to come from one kind of fevered imagination, but and have
Yeah,
a lot of weird kind of comedy blended into the horror.
yeah.
Um,
Eraserhead has a more specific vision, but yeah, I can see that too.
yeah,
I mean, the part that you described where the guy gets his hands dissolved and he just doesn't seem that concerned about it is what that's probably my favorite thing in the whole movie is that this he has his hands dissolve and he just feels like, huh, weird. And then he just sort of describes there's no blood or flesh left. Oh, now it's falling apart because my cartilage is rotting. I think you're just gonna have to rip my hands off for me. It's such a weirdly comedic sequence.
yeah, yeah. It produces a lot of great stills. You know, that's
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. All throughout the Nightmare in USA has him staring at his skeleton hands.
yeah,
There's
yeah. No,
also a woman who gets her head sawed off, but that with her necklace. You don't really see it, but it reminded me and like, is it possible that Dario Argento saw Deathbed before he made Deep Red? And then I realized no, because it didn't even come out in America really until 77, which would have been 2 years after Deep Red.
yeah,
So he's off
no.
the hook for that one.
If anything, if they could have seen Deep Red.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
No, it's. I mean, this one of all the films we're talking about is the one that has like a. I think is this the only supernatural film? I think that it is, other than
Um,
Ganja Hess. I think
yeah, I
that
mean
this.
vampires, but most of it you can explain away the weird shit with this person is hallucinating because they're mentally ill.
Yeah, this is the only one that is a proper monster movie.
Yeah,
I mean, because I was thinking about like, are all of these films horror films? And I consider them all horror films, but I mean, some bend that definition to the breaking point, and this one is a proper monster movie.
yeah. I also did some very brief research on killer beds in movies, and I didn't find a lot. There's Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a 2002 movie that's also called Deathbed,
The Danny
but
Draven movie for Full Moon.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also one called The Sleeping Car that's about a haunted train car that has a bed that eats people that I actually rented years ago on VHS. Douglas Curtis, 1990. Actually has a scene where a bed eats somebody.
Trying
But
to
yeah,
think.
not a very popular movie monster. I guess because beds don't move around very much.
No, it's
But you got a little
surprising.
of it in like every Nightmare on Elm Street movie has some sort
Yeah.
of killer bed. Like God, the water bed one in the fourth movie, I think it is. That's my
Isn't is
favorite.
that Shocker also does that?
Yeah, maybe Shocker does. It was something Craven was pissed that he didn't get to do it for himself, so he did it too. I
Yeah.
never thought about it that way.
I know there's a waterbed in one of them. I thought it was Shocker, but yeah, no, it isn't a threatening creature in very many other
Just
films I
don't
can
go to
think
sleep
of.
on it.
Yeah, no, but you'd think that everybody like gets into bed having a potential nightmare after a horror movie. You'd be surprised, how few
Hmm.
films really deal with that location.
Yeah, like the shower in Psycho. I mean, nobody wanted to go in the shower because
Yeah,
nobody wanted to go back in the water after Jaws. Nobody wanted to go back to bed after they saw Deathbed.
it's a pretty unusual. It's yeah. I think we probably said
Leave
all
it
that
at
we
that.
need to say about this one. I mean, what do you say about Deathbed?
No, it's that was when I was watching it. I'm like, yeah, this is weird. So then we'll move from the weirdest movie to the densest movie here. In Ganja and Hess from 1973. I don't know when this was actually released because it was released. It got some sort of it was like at Cannes or something in
Mhm.
'73. So I think that's its official release date. Yeah.
Yeah, it had some stray New York screenings that I found newspaper listings for, but yeah, I mean, it did get reviewed by critics, but they
Hmm.
didn't get it at all.
No,
And
it won audience award at Cannes, right? It won something.
oh, I
I
don't
thought it.
have that in front of me. I can look it up. I don't think it won an audience award. I think maybe like a critics prize of some kind, but I
Some
don't.
some sort of Critics Choice.
Critics choice. Okay.
Critics Choice at Con. So somebody there out there thought it was cool, I guess. Um.
Yeah, no, I mean that and Mafu Cage were both films that I think got some festival play but
Mhm.
like they were just too idiosyncratic for grindhouses. I think Yeah, what's the, how do they describe this one on Letterboxd?
They said, after being stabbed with an ancient germ-infested knife, a doctor finds himself with an insatiable desire for blood. That's pretty much what the opening crawl tells us. That that that's about as much. I mean, that we sort of go into the movie with that information right off the bat.
Yeah, now this one was Bill Gunn. He had made Stop, which didn't get released, but he made that for Warner Brothers, I think. And then
Mhm,
he had written a few films that had been released, the Angel Levine and The Landlord, the Hal Ashby movie.
mhm,
So he had some kind of track record in film before this, but this was a situation where Blackula had made a lot of money for it was AIP, and so I
mhm.
think that they were interested in having another black vampire movie. And so I think even though Gunn was really not interested in making a genre film, he saw that as an opportunity to use the money for a black
Yeah.
vampire movie to make something really kind of dwelling on themes of addiction and religion, and really kind of make something quite personal and idiosyncratic. It's maybe the most acclaimed film of all the films that we're talking about,
Well,
although it
I
was.
was I was gonna say it might be the most important movie I've ever covered on Genre Grinder. I mean, I've covered some popular ones, but not that many that were like important to world cinema, not just the genre I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, this is one I suggested the last time we did this, and
Hmm.
I don't know if there was another series that you wanted to slot this one in, so we didn't cover it then. But I mean, when I think about.
I did do a friend my friend Justin and I did one on Afrofuturism, and we added some horror films, but then we ended up covering one called The Bloodites that was made much later in Africa.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, we didn't end up covering this. I think that was my reasoning, is that this was almost an Afrofuturism, and actually, um, I would connect it a little bit to not to compare the handful of '70s black genre movies I've seen, but part of genre Ganja and Hess's vibe. It feels like it takes place between Leonard Cohen's Space is the Place, which is a sort of surrealistic, metaphor heavy musical film,
Mhm.
and Lizzie Borden's Born in Flames, which is a mockumentary with really big ideas in it, which were two things I watched for that podcast.
Mm.
That might just be my limited bias that's connecting them in my brain, but I think that the closest I can get to a hot take on Ganja and Hess is that I think that at times it does a lot of interesting mockumentary type stuff that I had forgotten it did, and I don't know if it had much of a influence on mockumentary and found footage horror outside of that, but it's sort of interesting that it got to some of that stuff. Um,
How do you mean?
I mean, like the opening and the way it's sort of being the all the stuff in the church feels like it was taken from a documentary about revival churches and stuff,
Mhm.
and it's sort of the way that Gunn mixes that with these scenes, and especially the early scenes, basically before we meet Ganja.
Right.
All the scenes where he stars, because he's the secondary lead for the beginning, and you would almost he's almost the this movie doesn't have a lot in common with Dracula, but he's almost the what's the name of the character who sort
Harker?
of yeah
Yeah, I was thinking that Bill Gunn does play kind of a Harker-ish kind of character,
Harkerish guy, and he's sort of having these conversations with Dr. Hess
played
that
by Dwayne Jones of Night of the Living Dead fame.
right, which is the reason most people would have known this. I think that Dwayne Jones's involvement, not the recommendations of people like Spike Lee, but Dwayne Jones's involvement is one of the main things that kind of kept this movie in the public knowledge, because Jones didn't really do a lot else other than this and Night of the Living Dead. He was mostly a stage actor, correct? Am I
Yeah, well, he's also in another film with Bill Gunn, the Kathleen Collins film Losing Ground in the early '80s. But yeah, he didn't do a lot of other
he had
genre
like
films. Yeah.
cameo in and there's a vampire movie that he's in that he's barely in, but that was like the last movie he made. But he's just, yeah, is like this guy who's one of the most important, not just black actors, but just actors in general to modern horror, and what we start calling it modern horror with Night of the Living Dead. And I think his cult appeal kept this movie in. But anyway, the way that the scenes between him and Gunn, where Gunn is just sort of talking about life,
Mhm.
they feel like a documentary about Gunn's character to me. Like there's just something about the way they remind me of stuff like boy, I'm just losing titles today. What's the one about the Bouviers?
Grey Gardens?
Grey Gardens. It's got this
Mm.
kind of Grey Gardens thing to it for me. And it loses it a lot once Ganja shows up and it becomes much more focused on plot elements and stuff, which we can talk about. But there's just
Yeah.
something about those early scenes and the incorporation of the church sequences and the way that they use narration throughout that reminds me of those earlier documentaries where you would have footage of your subject doing something and you would put narration of the subject talking about like their life or something over that. It just was a sort of documentary style that would have been popular in the 70s and early 80s. You'd see it in a lot of I used to watch a lot of short nature documentaries because my dad was a teacher and he would get them from the UNICEF store for rental. And it just reminded me a lot of that kind of stuff, these sort of slice of life, rural kind of documentaries that they would make. And so I don't, obviously you didn't see it that way. So that might have
No.
just been me reading it that way, but that was something that I really got the second time around.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't seen I mean, I can see what you're talking about. I never thought of it that way. I think the thing I always associate with it, and I don't know that this is my own kind of weirdness, I think of Cassavetes when I watch it.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and to me, as someone who doesn't watch a lot of Cassavetes, because when I was younger, I had no patience for it, and I've sort of grown to appreciate it.
mhm.
Those movies have that sort of verite, cinema verite feel that makes them feel more real than real.
Well,
And so I think of them as pseudo documentary s too.
yeah. Well, I think when we talked about Messiah of Evil last time, and Messiah of
Hmm.
Evil was a film where they had the production sound, but then the film kind of fell apart before they could really loop a lot of the
Yeah.
dialogue. So it has a kind of dialogue recording that you sometimes have to lean in to catch every word. And Ganja Hess has
Yeah.
that same kind of like rough audio recording, so it feels like more documentary-ish because it doesn't feel like a movie sometimes
Yeah. Yeah.
like and it's also edited in such a jagged kind of way, deliberately obscuring certain details. I mean, have you ever seen I don't know if this is getting ahead of ourselves, like the recut version that everyone like this is one of those
No.
films. Okay, so
Yeah, I never saw it. Was Blood Couple was,
yeah.
and it was cut to shreds. I've never seen that version.
Well, the thing so this is a sidetrack. I mean, there's two films that we're going to talk about that had been recut, and then those recut versions were the only way you could see it for decades.
Hmm.
And Pigs is the other one. But the Ganja and Hess was recut almost right away into a more straightforward take that had a million titles. I mean, it was not only Blood Couple, but it was also Black Vampire. It was The Moment of Terror, Vampires of Harlem, Double Possession, Black Evil. So it had, I mean, as you maybe already starting to pick up, a lot of films that like mention blackness, like
Hmm. Yeah,
Blackula,
it
Black
was. They
Frankenstein.
were definitely trying to make another blaxploitation horror movie.
Well, what's interesting, so I had thought that Blood Couple was going to be radically different than Ganja and Hess, and it's sort of different, but it's only using footage from Ganja and Hess, and it's using the Ganja and Hess screenplay as its
Hmm.
guide. Whereas what I could be I could be misremembering. I thought that when Ganja and Hess was edited, that the editor was kind of left to be creative with the footage without looking at like the guide of a screenplay to the degree that the Blood Couple cut is doing. So it's using material that Bill Gunn himself didn't care for in some
Hmm.
cases, but it's trying to tell the story that got him the financing.
Okay.
So it's not radically different. I mean, it has some of the same, it's not like it's rescored. It's not like Possession or something where it's like like a shorter, more conventional cut of
Right.
a more ragged idiosyncratic kind of director's cut. Like it's closer than you might imagine, and you can actually find that version on YouTube at this point. It used to be hard to see it, but it's yeah. In either case, I mean, I think what threw me the first time I watched it was I thought that Hess already had the blood curse because the initial narration tells us so, but then we
Mhm.
watch his actual infection, at the hands of
Yeah.
the kind of deranged coworker, which confused me because the way that the whole fight is kind of even filmed is a little bit kind of uh,
Yeah.
elliptically shot as far as like what's even going on. But yeah, no, I think we talked about Death Dream last time, and I know we didn't cover Martin, but Martin and Death Dream both are doing the drug addiction idea as vampire story. And I mean, there's other things that do this later, like Habit and the addiction. But this is the first one I can think of.
Yeah, I looked into it. I tried real hard,
Yeah.
and this is the first one I could find too.
Yeah. Well, Death Dream was also filmed in '72, but I think Death Dream was filmed towards the end of the year, and Ganja Hess was filmed in the summer. So they weren't aware of each other. They just both hit on that idea independently of each other's.
Mhm.
I assume I don't think Alan Ormsby was aware of a Bill Gunn film, and
Mhm.
just incorporated a couple months later because Ganja Hess wouldn't come out until '73.
Right.
But yeah, this one makes it like pretty explicit, and it's funny because I forgot like some of the earliest dialogue in the film is in the church, and like I'm high on God or high on religion. Like it's conflating the the effects of religion and spiritual awakening with the effects of drugs right at the beginning. And I mean, even the names of the characters. I mean, Ganja and Hess are
Yeah.
drug connotation, but yeah, I don't think that was. I mean, I don't know, like it does have horror scenes that feel like straight up genre movie scenes. I mean, either the murder of the pimp and the
Yeah.
street, the sex worker, and then the also, I mean, even like the discovery of the corpse in the basement. Like there's things that feel like kind of rooted in a gothic tradition as well, but they're kind of in the minority. I mean, most of it is kind of talking about ideas or like dealing in like kind of poetic kind of digressions.
I well, and that scene where she discovers the body, it takes a turn that you're not expecting, where she's just like she's more upset that he didn't tell her that there was a dead body, and I don't. There's no scene put in where he explains that he didn't actually kill the guy, that the guy killed
There is
himself.
in the blood couple version.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a situation where there, if Gunn was still alive, and he would have put together some sort of DVD director's cut by now that was like his true vision, and so the Ganja and Hess cut is like
Well, no,
almost a
the
rough.
Ganja Hess cut is his vision.
It is his vision. Okay.
Yeah, he deliberately obscured certain details.
Okay. Yeah.
So
It's that's crazy. I should see this other cut.
yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I'd heard about it as this desecration of this unusual art film, and
Hmm.
I mean, it's not as good as Ganja Hess. I mean, Ganja Hess is the stronger, more interesting work, but it clarifies certain things that were in the script that he wrote. So it's not like the invention of some outside person. It's just I think that he was inspired to try more adventurous things in the course of making the film, and I think
Hmm.
that the way they thought to try to ultimately sell this thing at the time was to make it closer to a conventional horror movie.
Hmm.
But I mean, either way, it's a pretty odd movie, even in its compromised version.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying. I mean, there's the clear like you said, the addiction metaphor is the clear metaphor, and the one that I don't think we've had before. But I don't know if there was a lot of other vampire movies that had a truly modern vampire in them. The problem with that being that I'm thinking modern in terms of the time I've been alive or my parents have
Well,
been alive.
Count Yorga Vampire was a big hit.
Yeah, that's
I
right. That
think
had
Count
already come
Yorga
out. Hell.
Vampire is one that like got overshadowed by a million things that came later. So I think people kind of forget it. But
And is I can't recall, is Yorga a Dracula, like is he like Blackula and Dracula in the 70s Hammer movies where he has come into the modern era but he's still a ancient person?
sort of, yeah. I mean, he's it's kind of closer to Fright Night, I guess. Like it's,
Mhm.
like it's a vampire in contemporary LA.
Mhm.
So it is kind of like a white Blackula.
Yeah,
um
cuz I mean that's the appeal of Black, and I love I should it, total aside, but Blackula Scream is I think the superior movie there. That's a really great movie that I would I wouldn't put Blackula in with these other movies we're talking about, but I would, if I made a list of my favorite underground 70s horror, American horror movies, I would add Scream, Blackula Scream to that one.
Yeah.
Um, but I was trying to think of other movies where you have a truly modern vampire who is like enjoying like modern life and doing modern things, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if there had been one, and
Yeah.
I can imagine there was one in like the 30s or 40s where it just didn't feel modern to me, like because it was an old movie. But I couldn't think of one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can't think of a whole lot of films before this that, like, dealt with, like, wealthy black intellectuals.
Right, and well, that's another thing that I had never thought of the first time I watched it that I thought was really interesting, and I did not notice that he mostly preys upon poor black people. He is there's
Yes.
like a whole 'nother layer of meaning behind him, living the life of he has a like a black servant.
Mhm.
There's these really uncomfortable scenes of him just sort of taking him for granted, and then Ganja sort of makes fun of that by being mean to the servant to kind of prove a point. But yeah, it's he's living this very erudite European lifestyle in this mansion, and then he goes down into the city. I Where does this take place? Do they ever mention?
Croton-on-Hudson and Nyack,
Okay,
like, New
because it
York.
has
Mm.
it has a very Southern Gothic kind of vibe to it, but um,
Yeah,
that's
no,
not
it's
really
it's it's the
it's not
same
its
it's the
thing.
same area where Shriek of the Mutilated was shot.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't feel like that.
No,
It feels more like it's taking place in the same universe as like Angel Heart, just several decades,
that's
a
interesting.
decade. Or
Yeah,
there's just something about it that feels Southern to me, and I
yeah.
think it's mostly the scenes where he goes down and preys upon either sex workers or yeah, he just preys upon poor black people, which I'm sure is a big had a lot of meaning behind it.
Well, I'm trying to think, was the pregnant woman or not pregnant, but the mother that is outside the one building, I can't remember if she was black or white, but, like, yeah,
I believe she's very light skinned
oh,
black.
you might be right. I know that he doesn't, he makes a comment early in the film about, like, he's the only, black guy on his block,
Yeah, and
which is why
if they find a
he
dead,
can't deal with a
yeah.
black dead body because the questions that the police will start asking. But yeah, I mean, I think that they are trying to make a point about, like, he has like a Eurocentric kind of art on the walls, like he can speak French, like he's reading books about African cultures like that are in French, like he's got like a
Yeah.
fair amount of like European kind of influence that I think it's tapping into something to like unleash this kind of African curse upon this guy that is kind of separated from his people in a way
Mhm.
like but it's what it's saying about that I guess is kind of more ambiguous, but I mean
Mhm.
that's those are the things that it's playing with as far as like the imagery and the undertones beyond just the drug thing, which kind of brings him into contact with poor black people but only in a predatory way.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that really stood out to me, other than the fact that I got the documentary mockumentary vibes from it. But
Yeah, I mean, this one, I mean, I think about like the eerie music and like the
yeah.
kind of electronically treated kind of like tribal music and the kind of melancholy feel that I associate with something like Martin, which also
Hmm.
has like the vampire going to other parts of town to prey upon people and also deals with kind of like the realities of inner city life
Hmm.
in a way that feels like almost documentary-ish on top of the vampire that may or may not be supernatural because he doesn't do anything supernatural.
No,
He just has this kind of addiction to blood that he
I mean,
tries,
and it
to
it,
deal with ethically at first, but then,
yeah,
gets further and further into criminality.
it seems like that Romero might have seen this and that it might have given him a little bit of thought
It's
to
hard to know because it was very hard to see it. I mean,
yeah.
I think the Museum of Modern Art might have preserved a copy, but like I don't know that it would have made it to Pittsburgh. And by the
You don't
time
think that like Dwayne Jones and him were still close and he found it?
it's possible he would have seen it, and also Blood Couple and its many iterations. I mean, it might have reached him. I mean, he could have seen it. I mean, I don't know if Death Dream, because Savini, the
Yeah.
connection to Death Dream,
Oh, that's true,
would have
Savini. Yeah, yeah.
also been something that could have been on his mind as far as that drug metaphor. But I mean, that kind of melancholy character study approach to vampire movies, I mean, I think does connect them. Although the Romero film, by comparison, is more straightforwardly a genre movie. For all of
Mhm.
its idiosyncrasies, it's a little bit easier to peg as horror. Ganja
It
and
ha
Hess, I think when I heard of it, I mean, this was one of the earliest DVDs I remember existing. Was it All Day Entertainment, I think, was like put out one of the earliest DVDs that was like, the original cut of Ganja Hess. I don't know if it was Tim Lucas, somebody like, I remember reading that like a bunch of that video watchdog kind of crowd that made the transition from Laserdisc to DVD partly because of Ganja Hess. Like it was the way to see
Interesting.
this once lost kind of horror film that it was like more talked about than seen, because it was not
Hmm.
something you could discover on television or that played even like any kind of theaters. I mean, other than just like a museum context. And then it went out of print almost right away. I remember like, being so happy when it came back. It's now it's been restored even since the Blu-ray. I don't know if it'll ever come out again in a further restoration, but it's one of those films that like kind of catapults further and further ahead up the kind of pantheon with each passing year. And I think
Hmm.
that I mean, certainly things like horror noir that like talk about
Yeah,
like,
I was
you know
just gonna say that I saw that documentary, but I have not read that book, Horror
yeah, well,
Noir.
both,
But
I mean,
I know it's central to the book.
yeah, well, I mean, there's really not any other. I mean, there's no other film like Ganja Hess before
Yeah,
Ganja Hess. I mean, even the surrounding films. I mean, other black horror films. Like black vampire movies or black possession movies or whatever. I mean, there's Blackula or Abbey or whatever. Like, there's nothing
Blackenstein.
that really kind of feels kind of like, yeah, as personal and idiosyncratic as Ganja Hess. I mean, I think about that even in comparison to the films we talked about last time. This one is maybe it's the biggest swing, as far as like the
Hmm.
ambitions of it. And it's I mean, I had friends that were going to it as a horror movie that were thrown by just how unlike a traditional genre movie it was.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not an easy film to, say throw this on at a party, if you want a vampire movie. Like
yeah.
it's more contemplative, but I think it's probably the best film we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the one that you could write a book about, you know?
Yeah.
I wanna highlight how good, because we talked about Dwayne Jones. Marlene Clark is
Oh
also
yeah.
super, and she's kind of interesting because she's, a cult movie royalty, but she kinda connects the horror and, n non-horror underground thing by, because she is in Putney Swap Swoop. I don't know how to actually say that.
Putney
Putney
Swope?
Swope. Yeah, so she's got the Robert Downey Sr. connection. She's got the Hal Ashbury connection. But then she's also in Switchblade Sisters and The Beast Must Die.
Right, right, right.
So, and Slaughter, which is like that's just a pure black exploitation action movie.
Right, Night
So,
of the Cobra Woman.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So she's like an interesting, and I don't know, I haven't seen all of her movies, but she is spectacular in this. And then I also wanted to mention that this was flat out remade by Spike Lee, and I have not seen that myself.
Oh, yeah, The Sweet Blood of
Sweet Blood.
Jesus. I have
Yeah.
seen it, but I mean, I haven't seen it since it came out. So I was meaning to rewatch that and Knock Knock before this, but
Oh, okay.
I didn't get a chance to. But yeah, I mean,
I know that Lee is a big fan of this movie, but I don't know how much
it's not
he
uninteresting if you know
focused.
Ganja Hess, but it's
Yeah.
not, a film I've ever really thought about a whole lot since. I mean, I
Hmm.
find it more interesting than his Old Boy remake, but it's like,
Yeah.
as
Well.
far as like films you don't really need to remake, I mean, he's two for two. as
Yeah.
far-
Yeah. Well, and then you mentioned Old Boy, and I think that I also am reminded of Park Chan Wook's Thirst has
Oh yeah, yeah,
similarities here
yeah.
because of the way he gets vampirism in that is he is in Africa doing, I can't remember if it's smallpox vex. No, it's like a super Ebola, and he's trying to help with that, and he gets super Ebola while in Africa, and so there's this sort of connection there, and then the fact that it revolves around this couple that he turns his girlfriend into a vampire, and then the struggles they have together, which is not something Ganjan Hess gets into too much. It sort of ends before it gets to that point, but there's some of
Yeah.
that in there too.
Yeah, no, no, there is. I mean, it becomes a lot more heartbreaking when that plot
Hmm.
point is reached because yeah, and Marlena Clark is the reason that it works as heartbreaking because she's so she has real pathos to those scenes. I mean,
Yeah.
the only film I thought of that we haven't really talked about much is The Addiction, the Abel Ferrara film, which is
Of
another
course.
explicitly drug metaphor kind of. I mean, she's injecting the blood like a needle. I mean, it's barely metaphor. I mean, it is straight up, telling you that it's a drug movie. But I mean,
Hmm.
but that also has the same like explicitly Christian solution to
Yeah.
the curse. I mean, I mean, you have, crucifixes and crosses and all that in Dracula type movies, but I mean, as far as like dealing with that in a contemporary kind of setting, I mean, it's not something you see as much in most, and honestly, in most vampire movies. That in post Dracula, you don't really see that
Yeah.
as much as you see like,
Crosses are like tools in most modern vampire
yeah,
movies. It's not really the meaning behind the cross is it's meaningless mostly.
yeah. I mean, because they're not presuming a Christian audience is the only audience.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that The Addiction and Ganja Hess, I mean, are explicitly Christian films. I mean, or I'm not quite even sure though, because I'm not quite sure what Bill Gunn's view of it is. But I mean, it is shown to be a working solution. So it's, I don't know, but I mean,
Difference between a Baptist and Catholic, I think, is what you would because you can't make an Abel Ferrara movie without a bunch of Catholic guilt
no,
involved in it.
you really can't.
So this might be Baptist guilt. It might be one
Maybe
way to look at it.
that could
If
be,
I was
yeah.
if I was more of a religious scholar, which I'm not, so I
Yeah.
can't be sure.
Yeah, I think that it actually has a different ending than Blood Couple. I won't spoil it in case you do watch that
Okay.
version of it, but I mean, both of them are strong, idiosyncratic films that I think, I assume that if people have seen any films on this list, I mean, Ganja and Hess has gotten a pretty big profile in the last 20 years, so maybe
Yeah.
this would be one that they'd know. I mean, I certainly a lot of podcasts have done episodes on it, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of my favorites that we're talking about, and I think I still have not gotten to the bottom of all of its mysteries, which I kind of like about it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I'm going to end part 1 here. Please stay tuned for part 2, where we'll be talking about 6 more films. I should have that ready and edited early next month. Bill and I ended up talking for almost 4.5 hours, so there's a lot of editing still to be done. Though some of that time was spent with me eating a sandwich and us talking about ska music. Anyway, until then, you can find me on the Genre Grinder Facebook page, on @GenreGrinder on Twitter, @Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter, and Instagram, which is Genre Grinder Gabe. And thank you so much to my Patreon supporters, and we'll see you next month.
You won't see love everlasting, ever bright and new for us to have and hold. Love that is gentle, love that's